Dzień dobry, panie ta panowie. Good day, everyone. I'd like to present you our Stop Fake project. It was launched on the 2nd of March in 2014. I remember that Sunday evening, I was at my workplace in the newsroom in Kiev and was transcribing the interview about Euromaidan protests in Ukraine for Weekly magazine and sometimes look into Facebook. The day before, unmarked people with green military-grade uniforms and equipment had occupied Crimea Peninsula. The local population and Ukrainian media called them little green men, and Russian media called them polite people because they did nothing and were really polite. Obviously, they were Russian special forces, but Russia did not confirm that. Meanwhile, the most popular Russian media seemed gone crazy with fake news about events in Ukraine. The lies were so blatant that for some time Ukrainian journalists were speechless with shock. We spent quite a lot of time trying to find out who are those polite green men. And we were really sincerely looking for the other side of the story. I looked into Facebook once again and saw a notification in a closed group of Ukrainian journalists, alumni from the Mohyla School of Journalists and the postgraduate program Digital Future of Journalism based on the National University Kyiv Mohyla Academy. Somebody of us wrote, we have to do something. Then we put lots of strange ideas like to work as trolls in our free time. And I offered to create a website that would reveal false news about Ukraine in the pro-Kremlin media. Just take a suspicious page of news, check it, and if it turned out a fake, to put it on our website, and if it's not a fake, do nothing. It was easy to be done and did not require money. Besides that, you can always find all fakes in one place. These were my arguments. One of my colleagues immediately supported the idea. He created a blog on WordPress in 2 hours. Other colleagues reported about the new website in their media. One article about this was reposted in social media 30,000 times in 2 hours. It means that Ukrainians were hungry for the information. Hundreds of people wrote us. They sent us news for checking. They offered help or just thanked. At first, we launched Russian and English version of Stop Fake. Now we have 10 language versions in European countries. Our project is independent. We do not represent or support any political party, public authorities, or business institutions, or financial institution. Anyone can join Stop Fake team. The only requirement is to be impartial. We hoped that the Crimean crisis would be resolved in 2 or 3 months, and we will finish our project. But since then, we faced a crash of Malaysian airline jumbo jet, a war in eastern Ukraine, and other tragic events. Russian propaganda twisted all the facts about these events and shows them to the Western audience and to the Russian people themselves in a distorted light. Therefore, our project will be celebrate 3 years on March 2nd. At first, there were 40 of us, and now we have a team of just 16 people and 10 editors of language versions. Stop Fake was the first and remains the only website which is engaged in fact-checking in media exactly to fight Russian propaganda in Ukraine. Some others also occasionally do it, but we have taken a leading position. Our website was viewed more than 7 million unique users, and this audience is growing. About 42% of our audience are Ukrainians, about 30% are Russians. And 11% are our very target audience from occupied territories of eastern Ukraine and Crimea. However, there are also people from the United States, Europe, etc., etc. We have about 180,000 followers in social media. We checked tens of thousands of articles, photos, and videos. We have revealed more than 1,000 fakes. And again, we do not view this as just cases of bad or sloppy journalism, but of intentionally misrepresenting the facts and reporting false information. Most of them are Russian. However, there is enough misleading information in Ukraine and Europe too. So we collected all those stories and put them in a sort of archive, which is available in our website to show the scale and the system behind it. We show this to our audience and increase their media literacy in this way. So the data collected by us allows us to make an analysis of all those fake stories. By analyzing 500 items of debunked fakes, we identified 18 main frames formed by Russian propaganda and covered by Russian state and privately owned media. For example, on Ukraine, and all of them are very, very famous already. For example, the narrative of Ukraine as a fascist state, of Ukraine as a failed state, or the junta who came to power as a part of the coup d'etat here in Ukraine, and they just try to find every week or something every day some supportive facts for all those frames to make sure that they are repeated all the time and they keep them alive. I tried to place them from older to newer ones and to show how the same narratives have changed over time. This classification is fairly conditional, but I'll try it. These are most popular frames of Russian propaganda in 2014. The first, the narrative about coup d'etat and Western-backed junta, constructed mostly by using hate speech in the media. A fake reality about Ukraine as a fascist state was created through fake photos with swastikas, fake news about fascists in volunteer battalions in Ukraine, etc. Russia is not a part of occupation or war. They are not there. It's a Putin famous quote about Russian armies in Ukraine. Ukrainian army is weak. The soldiers allegedly were stealing weapons and fleeing to Russia. But at the same time, they referred as occupants and aggressors. Periodically in the Russian media, there are news about the secret NATO military training camps for Ukrainians somewhere in Lithuania, for example. The next topic of fakes is on volunteer battalions. Later, they became the National Guard of Ukraine. Russian media called them neo-Nazis, punishers, militants, Banderovics, the right sector. And the right sector itself was called fascists and terrorists. Fake news about the huge number of eternally displaced people and refugees to Russia. And finally, there are really a lot of fakes about MH17. They often contradict one another, but it seems that the propagandists are not care about it. Some examples. This is not a border crossing between Ukraine and Russia. This is a border crossing between Ukraine and Poland. There is not mass exodus of Ukrainians. These people are not refugees. Next one. This is not a real poster of the Ukrainian nationalists with Adolf Hitler. It's the real poster from 2012 with Yevhen Konovalets. He was political leader of the Ukrainian nationalist movement about 100 years ago. The next. It's one of the most famous fake about two slaves and plot of land to Ukrainian soldiers fighting in Donbass. To show the alleged barbarism of Ukrainian army. And the next, one of the most noticeable fakes, is that of a 3-year-old boy in Slavyansk, a small city in Donbass, who was allegedly crucified by Ukrainian soldiers. It's a fake. It was a fake. And the next, here are some propaganda narratives in 2015. Territorial claims from neighboring countries like Hungary, Poland, etc. Stop Fake has researched and debunked scores of outlandish stories, including HIV dispersed by Ukrainian military jets over Donbass to punish the population, to encourage locals to flee the territory. The next, territorial disintegration of Ukraine. Different parts of Ukraine allegedly demand federalization. The next, fake legitimization of Crimea annexation and occupation of Donbass by foreign governments, international organization, or foreign media. I'll tell you about the example. Excuse me. Finally, Russian media often draw an analogy between Ukraine, Turkey, Syria, and ISIS. In such fakes, Ukrainian army is no longer weak, but cruel. Let me tell you about some examples. The central region of Poltava is the latest province to demand federalization from Kiev, claiming that national MPs asked Ukraine's president and prime minister to support an agreement on the division of powers between the central government and the regional state administration. But in reality, it's not about federalization, it's just decentralization as part of the territorial reform in Ukraine. The next, on September, scores of Russian media, along with their English and Spanish language equivalents, reported that Catalonia was planning to recognize the annexed Crimea as part of Russia. But in reality, it was the initiative of the marginal political party. It does not have even 1% of votes at last elections. Let us look at the propaganda narrative since 2016 until now. They are here. Let's pay attention to Ukraine as a failed state. It's interesting that the word gender almost disappeared from the news the last time. The Ukrainian government is now referred as legitimate, but making bad decisions. It can be connected with the next round of the Minsk negotiations about possible elections in the uncontrolled territory of Ukraine. One more example of such kind of fakes. Russia's official government publication «Российская газета» published a claim that the Washington Post was calling for a stop to all financial assistance to Ukraine. In reality, it was just a blog. And the Washington Post did not call for Ukraine aid to be cut, nor did the authors of the blog. A newspaper selected only one point from the blog and deliberately omitted the rest of text. For these 3 years, the number of fake publications did not go down. They did not become less, sometimes even more. It depends on the information events. We can trace the peaks of such fakes. They are usually associated with some kind of real events in the real political and military life in diplomacy. For example, the next escalation of hostilities in the east of Ukraine, like events near Avdiivka 2 weeks ago, or any events associated with Crimea, or the next round of the Minsk negotiations. In these 3 years, the Russian propaganda has become much more complex and refined. It's evolving. We started to look at propaganda only in the Ukrainian context. However, the preliminary findings from our data said that it's just the same technique works in every country of the EU and even in the US. Kremlin uses the tools tested in Ukraine. It adjusts to the problem of other countries, as well as in 2014, it have adjusted to the Ukrainian problems. Its main purpose is to sow distrust in society. Jakub Janda and Ilyas Sharipjanov from Atlantic Council identified 6 narratives that Russian disinformation pushed during 2016 in Europe. The first, Europe is facing Armageddon due to migration. The most visible fake news story is well known. A Russian-speaking girl named Lisa was allegedly raped by a gang of refugees in Germany. In reality, the rape never occurred. The second one, Europeans allegedly want to recognize Crimea as Russian, but the EU stands on the way. The narrative implied that there are a gradual acceptance of the changed status quo in Europe. The third, Ukraine isn't part of Europe. The Russian military's official news channel TV Zvezda posted a piece claiming that Poland is planning to build a wall, to keep out Ukrainian refugees, citing an interview Poland's interior minister gave. However, in that interview, nothing about a wall is mentioned. The next, Latvians are perpetual fascists. The Russian media likes to remind its listeners that Latvians either killed Russians under the Bolsheviks or killed Russians as a member of the Waffen SS. They like Lithuania. Finally, Merkel, Holland, and the EU are to blame for the migrant crisis. Some EU countries are portrayed as the victims of unwise European policies. Now, journalists from around the world are faced a challenge of fake news. As I mentioned in the beginning of my talk, we are losing this battle. We are now witnessing huge changes in journalism. And all previously existing rules and norms seems to move very fast. It makes our work sometimes very difficult and sometimes even pointless. Well, we think journalism should basically bring their profession back and start to do what journalism were always expected to do, just checking facts, and pushing those facts to audiences. Even when audiences are reluctant at some points to hear that. We need to regain our profession back. But on the other side, we really need to reinvent journalism because old rules are dying. And it's not a problem of journalism only. So, for example, the Ukrainian lessons with annexation of Crimea was very painful because journalists were not quick enough to adjust to arising issues and arising challenges. The momentum was lost. And that basically created a good atmosphere for Russia to take the next step and start the war in eastern Ukraine. This really was a situation when slow journalism or old-style journalism played a very wrong role. But everything is not that bad. For example, the Euro Parliament was voted on a resolution aimed at countering disinformation and hostile propaganda from Russia in November. This resolution is a signal that Europe is beginning to realize the threat. Approval of this resolution is as well one of the achievements of Stop Fake, as we had many opportunities to speak to members of the European Parliament and to give our facts on how information is manipulated. Our recommendations and suggestions were taken into account while working on the document. It's about one important thing we realized during these 3 years. Apart from our direct audience in social networks, etc., we define audiences that influence the decision-making process in their countries. Journalists, experts, policy and opinion makers, and so they start to deal with the Russian propaganda in their countries at the state level. This helps to increase understanding of threats and make some political steps against them. This brings a longer and probably more effective result. It's just been one of the objectives of Stop Fake: tell the problems of propaganda, raise awareness of different audiences, and talk about what propaganda, Russian propaganda, is not just a problem of Ukraine. Ukraine was just one of the first laboratories for testing the various instruments of propaganda. But this problem is European, and now we also see it spread to the United States in the context of presidential election. Distrust in society is a threat to democracy. The purpose of propaganda is sowing distrust. We are just journalists. We don't have to engage in a counter-propaganda. The only propaganda that works for us is propaganda of truth. What for? Just one example. The MP of Zlatoust city in Russia, Alexander Negrebetskych, voluntarily went to fight in the Donbass as an ordinary soldier. He went to defend his brothers Slavs and Russian land from the Nazis, like his grandfather did during so-called Great Patriotic War. So, fighting against fake news really can save lives. Thank you.